Imagine this, it's 6 a.m. Your smartphone alarm blares in the dark. You drag yourself out of bed, pour a rushed cup of coffee, and prepare to trade another day of your life for a paycheck. By the time you finally reach retirement, you will have spent roughly 90,000 hours of your waking existence at a job. 90,000 hours. We treat this as the ultimate, unavoidable default of being an adult. It is just the way the world works. But what if I told you that for 99% of human history, the very concept of a job would have sounded absolutely insane? We possess this stubborn, culturally ingrained misconception that before modern civilization, ancient humans lived in a constant, desperate state of panic. We picture them endlessly fighting off predators, shivering in cold caves, and barely scraping by on scraps of meat. But the reality is completely different. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors woke up with no boss, no deadlines, no rent, and no commute. They woke up when their bodies were naturally rested, stretched, and essentially asked themselves, what do I actually want to do today? Today, we are going to step back in time to uncover what a day in the life of a prehistoric human actually looked like. And spoiler alert, they were already living the relaxed, free-flowing retirement dream that you are currently working your entire life to achieve. Let's start with the hard data. How do we actually know they weren't just miserable and starving all the time? In 1963, an anthropologist named Richard Lee traveled to Botswana to study the Ruhan Sea people. They are one of the few remaining groups on Earth living in a way that closely mirrors our pre-agricultural ancestors. What he found completely shattered the academic consensus of the time. The adults in this community spent, on average, just about 2.5 days a week acquiring food. That is roughly 15 to 17 hours of work per week. Think about that for a second. If you work a standard corporate job, you probably hit that 17-hour mark by Tuesday afternoon. And this wasn't just an isolated fluke. When researchers looked at other hunter-gatherer societies across the globe, the Hadza in Tanzania, the Ache in Paraguay, the Martu in Australia, they found the exact same pattern. Different continents, completely different climates, identical results. They put in their 15 to 20 hours of survival tasks, and the rest of the time was entirely their own. Now, a skeptic might say, sure, those are modern tribes. What about the actual ancient humans from tens of thousands of years ago? It's a fair question, and the answer is literally written in their bones. When archaeologists line up the skeletons of ancient hunter-gatherers next to those of the very first farmers, the contrast is staggering. The ancient hunter-gatherers were noticeably taller. Their teeth were in fantastic shape, free from the heavy decay and cavities caused by the grain-centric diets of early agriculture. Crucially, their skeletons told the story of a much easier physical life. They showed far less joint damage and arthritis. They weren't breaking their backs doing repetitive, grueling manual labor from sunrise to sunset in the fields. They were stronger, healthier, and operating on a schedule that offered more leisure time than any modern worker could ever dream of. So, if our ancestors were only working 15 hours a week, what exactly were they doing with that massive surplus of free time? If you want the ultimate proof that early humans weren't constantly fighting for their lives, you don't need to look at their weapons. You need to look at their art. In 1994, explorers venturing into the Chavade cave in southern France stumbled upon something breathtaking. Incredibly detailed paintings dating back roughly 30,000 years. We are not talking about crude, basic stick figures. These were stunning, dynamic depictions of horses, lions, and rhinoceroses, drawn with advanced techniques like perspective, shading, and an intricate understanding of movement. Creating this wasn't a quick doodle to pass 5 minutes. Someone ventured deep into a pitch-black cave, set up a fire, and spent hours, perhaps even days, meticulously painting wildlife on a stone canvas. They didn't do this to secure a meal. They didn't do it to defend their tribe. They did it for beauty. They did it for meaning. They did it simply because they had the time to express themselves. And this wasn't an isolated hobby. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists unearthed 100,000-year-old seashells with tiny, perfectly precise holes drilled through them. This was ancient jewelry meant to be strung together and worn. Here is the kicker. The nearest coastline was over a dozen miles away. Someone literally walked a 25-mile round trip just to collect prissy shells, and then spent hours carefully drilling them with stone tools. All of this immense effort, just to look good. Or consider the 40,000-year-old flute carved from a vulture bone discovered in Germany. It features perfectly spaced fingerholes designed by someone who deeply understood pitch and melody. They didn't craft this complex instrument to hunt. They crafted it for music. Across the globe, the ancient world is littered with elaborate tools, jewelry, and decorative objects that offered absolutely zero practical survival benefit. It proves one undeniable fact. When humans aren't forced to grind for their next meal, Their natural instinct is to create. So, let's reconstruct what an average day actually looked like for your ancient ancestors. You wake up shortly after dawn, naturally rested. The fire from the night before is still glowing softly. Someone casually tosses a few branches on it. Your breakfast consists of leftover roasted fish or some wild berries gathered the previous afternoon. There is no rushing to catch a train, no scrolling through stressful emails, no impending sense of dread about a morning meeting. Breakfast is purely social. People chat, laugh, and loosely figure out what the day might hold. Not because they have a rigid schedule to keep, but simply because humans are natural planners. By mid-morning, a small group might head out to hunt or forage. But here is the secret. You don't do this every single day. If your group had a highly successful hunt 2 days ago and the community is well fed, you might just stay at camp. If you do stay behind, you might spend the morning working on your craft, maybe weaving a basket, sharpening a flint knife, or softening an animal hide. But this isn't work in the modern sense. There are no performance reviews, no KPIs, and no managers breathing down your neck. You take your time because competence is deeply valued. In this society, making something highly functional and beautiful earns you immense respect from your peers. When hunting does happen, it looks nothing like the frantic, adrenaline-fueled action movies we see in theaters. Humans utilize the technique called persistence hunting. We are the only mammals on Earth that can actively sweat to regulate our body temperature while running. Because of this biological superpower, ancient hunters didn't need to sprint or overpower their prey with brute force. They simply tracked an animal at a steady, rhythmic jog for a few hours until the animal naturally overheated and had to stop. It was a beautiful game of patience and endurance, not sheer violence. Including travel time, this entire food gathering process might take 3 to 6 hours. The group brings the resources back. Everyone shares the meal, and by the early afternoon, the productive portion of your day is completely over. What happens next is perhaps the hardest thing for a modern, hustle culture mindset to comprehend. By 2 p.m., you are done. The rest of the day belongs to you. So, what do you do when your shift ends? So early, the answer is everything, and absolutely nothing. You rest, you sit in the shade, you play with your kids, you take a nap. Anthropologist James Sussman noted that adults in hunter-gatherer societies spend up to 6 hours a day in pure, unadulterated social time. This wasn't considered lazy, it was vital. In a world completely devoid of money, police forces or legal contracts, your survival insurance was your community. If you didn't invest deeply in your relationships, people wouldn't be inclined to share with you when times got tough. You spent hours chatting, laughing, and grooming each other, not just to pass the time, but because connection was the ultimate currency. And then, the sun sets. This is where something truly magical happens. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wisner analyzed hundreds of hours of recorded conversations among the Ruhonzi. She noticed a fascinating shift. During the daylight hours, conversations were highly practical. Who saw animal tracks? Where are the best berries? Who isn't pulling their weight in the camp? But at night, gathered around the warmth of the fire, the tone changed completely. A staggering 81% of campfire conversations shifted to storytelling. This was the incubator of human culture. Under the stars, with full stomachs and a profound sense of safety, humans talked about the cosmos, the spirit world, and the heroic tales of their ancestors. They cracked jokes and pondered the universe. When it was finally time to sleep, they didn't just pass out for 8 hours straight like we try and often fail to do today. Before the invention of artificial light, humans generally practiced two-phase sleep. You would go to sleep for about 4 hours, wake up in the pitch black, for an hour or two of quiet reflection, intimacy, or tending to the fire, and then drift off for a second sleep until dawn. Today, if you wake up at 2 a.m., you call it insomnia and stress about your alarm clock. For your ancestors, it was just a peaceful, normal part of the night. So, if life was a continuous loop of 15-hour work weeks, abundant leisure time, and deep community bonds, what on earth went wrong? About 10,000 years ago, humans made a monumental shift. We started planting seeds and domesticating animals. We invented agriculture. And in many ways, agriculture was a brilliant, incredibly successful trap. Farming allows you to produce far more calories per acre than hunting and gathering. More food means you can feed more people. But a larger population requires even more food, which requires more farming. Within just a few generations, human populations exploded. Suddenly, there were simply too many mouths to feed to ever go back to the old, carefree hunting and gathering ways. We were locked into the new system, and this new system demanded relentless, back-breaking labor. Plowing, weeding, harvesting, storing, and defending crops from pests and rival groups. As we discussed earlier, the skeletal evidence is crystal clear. Early farmers worked significantly harder, suffered more physical deterioration, and actually died younger than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. But the population kept growing. Towns became cities. With massive populations came the need for specialization. We needed full-time potters, weavers, and administrators. We needed soldiers and priests. And eventually, we created the ultimate concept that would define modern life. The job, the idea that your time, your waking existence, could be bought and owned by someone else, in exchange for the resources you need to survive. By the time the modern era rolled around, the original human lifestyle had been entirely paved over. We replaced the natural rhythms of the sun with strict schedules, endless obligations, and the normalization of spending 90,000 hours of your life working just to keep the system running. Today, we spend our lives endlessly chasing this grand illusion of success. We burn ourselves out trying to accumulate wealth, titles, and achievements, desperately hoping that one day we can finally retire and just relax. But your ancestors woke up every single morning already free. They were already enough. They didn't have to earn their right to exist through relentless productivity. They made art, they made music, and they built deep human connections, not because they managed to squeeze it in after a 9-to-5 shift, but because that is simply what humans do when we actually have the time to be human. We traded our absolute freedom for food security. We traded our leisure for population growth. We traded our time for productivity. So, the next time you feel guilty for just wanting to sit on the couch, stare at the clouds, and do absolutely nothing, don't be. You aren't lazy. You are just a prehistoric human, perfectly designed for a life of freedom, trying to navigate a world obsessed with work. If you suddenly got your prehistoric freedom back and only had to work 15 hours a week, what would you do with all that free time? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to read your answers. If this video made you look at your 9-to-5 a little differently, hit that like button, subscribe for more mind-expanding history, and I will see you in the next one.